that every week, because every week I think that I'm going to do something completely crazy and brand new. And this week is something that is going to be a lot of fun. This one is kind of cool because we are going to be talking to venture capitalists in the hospitality space, which is kind of an interesting subject because venture capitalism and hospitality was sort of going big macro today in the full scope of the space. And I'm really looking forward to talking to the guys from Rodeo. And I know that sounds like a 1970s glam rock band. And I'm sure when you saw that pop up as a live stream today, you were like, who the hell is Shawn talking to today? This will be my 242nd episode of the Post Show podcast. So as always, I'd like to say thank you so much for your support. I'm really looking forward to introducing both Carlton and James from Goat Rodeo. How are you, gents?
Hey, Shawn, thanks for having us on.
So this is going to be a lot of fun because just off camera, I'm already in the 5 minutes we had off camera, I'm already blown away with just some of the points you have, because sometimes when I talk to and I'm sure you guys feel the same way, when you talk to cocktail bartenders in the niche, you quickly understand that the grand scheme of things is so much bigger than the cocktail realm and cocktail bartenders and that sort of thing. So you start off the episode off with origin stories. So, Carlton, I'm going to let you kick it off. How did you get into the game? How did you get to this point?
Yeah, did a lot of interesting things. Lived abroad for a while. Worked for the Department of Homeland Security. But I'll fast forward through all that. Coming out of grad school, I actually joined E&J Gallo. And then kind of it's better to be lucky than good situation. Ended up reporting in directly to Ernest Gallo, obviously the younger, not the original. And he headed up the spirits business unit at the time. And I ended up kind of having a lot of latitude to build out all of Gallo's spirit products that were going to go to market. And biggest winery in the world, but definitely had the right, because of their distribution might and their fixed costs and supply and expenses, to play in that space. And so, got to learn, drink from a fire hose, put out all these products. And the thing that always stuck with me was Ernest said, I don't want you to start from the place of make me a successful brand. I want you to ask what makes brands successful. Unpack how you launch them in the on-premise. How do you launch them in mixology? How do you launch them in the off-premise? And then put that all back together and take the tools that we have here at Gallo and try to make brands that can be successful. And that was a really interesting way to think about it. And as I went through that process, what actually kept me up at night was, okay, well, what if you go one step further? What if you, instead of starting with all of the both advantages and disadvantages of launching a brand from Gallo, what if you're just launching these things from blank sheets of paper? And that eventually led me after doing some interesting brand launches from Gallo to moving over to the VC side and saying, how do I go find some of the most interesting entrepreneurs doing things that are completely unconstrained by legacy companies and building the future of what beverage, alcohol, and hospitality can be.
And so, James, how did you, obviously Carlton and Gallo, we're going to circle back on that one for sure, because Gallo is this massive behemoth for the brand, but at the end of the day, it did start off as a small little winery out of California. I think sometimes people demonize the big brands these days, but I'm like, big brands were small brands at one stage in their life. So, James, how did you get into the beverage sphere of the game?
Yeah, so similar story to Carlton's. He joined into the marketing arm of Gallo. I came into the finance side of Gallo post MBA. That's actually where we met. And a little different than him, I like to think better to be good than lucky. So while I was a finance guy, found my way over to the spirits business unit. The environment there at the time, CJ mentioned it was largest winery in the world, huge fixed cost investments in sales and go to market, as well as the back end supply chain. And spirits was trying to get to a place where they could compete on a national stage to be one of the largest suppliers. So it was really like working in a well-funded late stage startup. Super exciting, move fast, break things, learn, repeat. And over my tenure there, I got to oversee both the finance side of things, as well as eventually transitioned over and ran the new brand development team as well. So Carlton and I met there, realized very quickly that we saw the world the same way, or at least in a complementary manner. So when it came time to decide, what was the next step in my career, Gallo asked if I wanted to be in marketing or in finance, because I couldn't keep doing both. And I was thankful to have, both a good friend and somebody that I respect quite a bit, interested in starting something for the two of us. And so that's what led to the venture capital side of the business, which is what we're doing now.
So when did you kick off Goat Rodeo?
Goat Rodeo kicked off in 2019. So before that, and we still do, we have a consulting business. So it's very quiet, no website, nothing. We only take on a couple clients at a time, because when the major suppliers want to do brand development, they prefer not to know that they have other people kind of helping them. So we still do new brand builds for a lot of the major suppliers. So got some great clients there that we don't talk about because we're supposed to be silent.
Yeah.
Now, I think in the last couple of years, you've seen the sort of expansion and growth of capital investment in the drink business. Diageo has their little side venture capitalists when they bought and incubating Seedlip and a whole bunch of other brands. What was and obviously coming from Gallo, it's a little bit different coming from Gallo and then start talking about the guys from Drinksmith. Like that's a big dichotomy of size of project. What was the thing for Goat Rodeo that you were like, you know what, like these small businesses, and I think we talked about it off camera, really slim margins, sort of building a brand from the skin of your teeth. What was the movement that you guys had that you were like, I think we can do this ourselves?
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So part of it was at the time that I was at Gallo, I was sitting on the acquisition conversations. So we were starting to get a good understanding of what major suppliers are looking for in a brand, and what are the boxes, for lack of a better term, that need to be checked. How do you create something that once plugged into a system, like a Gallo, like a Diageo, are going to benefit from that scale, and continue to provide value for them going forward. So that was part of it. We felt very comfortable that with our experience having built things to fit into that system, we could identify what are the things that built outside of that system are only going to benefit more from coming in. So that was one piece of it.
It's always kind of helpful to take a step back and say, hey, what is venture capital dollars good for? And typically it works in a system where there might be low margins at the beginning because you're not at scale yet. But as you move through that adoption curve, the margins expand because scale expands, and you start to get that flywheel of consumer adoption, and then eventual acquisition. So a lot of what we do here is kind of look at generational changes in the beverage alcohol system, saying, okay, for the last 80 years, it's been a 3-tier system. Is it going to be for the next 80 years? And taking a step back and saying, okay, in a perfect world, what's niche and what could be bigger, and is it only niche because of current constraints in the system? So I'll kind of use an example, like mixology, which we're huge fans of, can really only truly exist as like thought leadership centers in a couple of cities, but that doesn't mean that everybody doesn't have that wonderful, beautiful aha moment the second they taste a really well-crafted cocktail. And so what a lot of what we do is look for things that could grow into that. So you actually mentioned Drinksmith as an example. Here's a company that has custom packaging, has gone through an excruciating history of getting their supply chains right, bringing on the right bartenders. And what they're really trying to do is democratize amazing cocktails. They're trying to bring them outside of the 50 best bars and make the world your cloud bar. And that's some place where venture capital is really necessary, because that's going to cost a lot of money at the beginning, and have low margins as custom packaging is at its beginning. But hopefully, as they continue to scale and continue to grow, it's going to become a more profitable business, and someone's going to say, I Diageo or Gallo or Bacardi is going to want to add them to their product offerings.
We're going to circle back to COVID, but do you think that things like Drinksmith and the DTC market, for the new CPGs and stuff like that, really blew up during COVID? I find it from my point of view, I find it hilarious how many bartenders were like, no, we're not going to do packaged cocktails and canned cocktails. And that's so faux pas and that sort of thing. And then COVID hits and all of a sudden it's like, everybody has a packaged cocktail. Do you think that COVID really pushed that direct to consumer sort of mentality?
I think that's the right way to look at it. COVID is not a reason; it's an accelerant. If you look at every other consumer category, the penetration of e-commerce on demand direct to consumer is at 20% or more. Pre-COVID, in beverage alcohol, which is one of the largest consumer categories in the world, it was under 2%. You can't tell me that people like standing in a liquor store more than they like standing in a grocery store or anything else that Amazon can bring to them. It just isn't true. Like toothpaste doesn't go back in tubes. Now they can not only get their favorite brands but also their favorite cocktail experiences brought directly to their door. It's going to be that, and that doesn't mean it can't exist alongside the really interesting and beautiful function that bars serve as soon as the pandemic recedes. But like, there's a reason that Amazon's worth $1 trillion because e-com matters to consumers. Convenience matters.
And I'm going to pitch this to both of you. Like, do you think that the demonization of Amazon? I don't demonize Amazon. They were the ones that were set up properly. And I work with a lot of craft distilleries here in the province. Up here in British Columbia, we have something like almost 80 distilleries, and you would be shocked at how many distilleries didn't even have e-com when COVID hit, and it took them about 3 to 4 months to cobble together a really average e-com store, which one of my companies deals in a lot of that sort of stuff. And I love when people demonize Amazon. I'm like, yeah, but Shopify isn't expensive and Shopify isn't hard to set up. Like, everybody should have an e-com site right now. Yeah. Do you think that with that acceleration that more people are really looking at online sales as an actual revenue stream that is worthy of it? Like, I know you guys are based on the West Coast as well. We've been locked down on and off for months. You guys have been locked down pretty much the same. Do you think online sales are really starting now for the mom and pop shops, them to understand like, oh, I really should be doing this?
Yeah, I think that it's absolutely something that everybody should be looking at. There's nothing wrong with being omni-channel at the end of the day. So being able to service customers in a manner that they're kind of looking for, it's in my opinion, it's a win-win. So pursuing that, whether it be from a brand standpoint or from a retailer standpoint, like having that as a revenue stream makes a lot of sense. And when you start to think about whether or not it can be just an awareness vehicle, which I think has traditionally been the case, or whether it can be something that is actually margin accretive. You start to look at the basket sizes. A $30 bottle of whiskey can handle a lot more in a shipping cost than a head of lettuce. And Amazon and a lot of these other companies are working really hard to try and figure out how to get you perishables that don't weigh a lot in the mail or in the back of somebody's car delivered to your door. They would much rather be delivering something that doesn't go bad necessarily and has a much larger basket size, because there's more of that margin to be spread around to the third party fulfillment, to whoever's managing the online store, as well as to the retailer or the brand themselves. So I think that it's something that's going to be here to stay. And when we look at alcohol, specifically the beverage space, I think it's a space that's going to benefit from it more so than a lot of other traditional categories that have already seen success in the digital platforms.
Yeah, I'll go one step further. Not should they be focusing on it. If they aren't, they're going to get left behind. To James's point on the basket sizes and the kind of counterintuitively, not only is beverage alcohol right for e-com, it's actually even more right for the smaller brands. So we'll take some of your British Columbia distilleries, for example. A tremendous amount of their volume is going through a tasting room that's a function of tourism. Mm-hmm. That means you have this touch point that can, so let's say that, it's a ski town distillery. All these skiers are coming through. They're enjoying it. They're vibing with the brand. How are they going to get that when they come home? You think Southern Wine and Spirits has picked up that craft distillery and is working its butt off to make sure it's all over Jupiter, Florida? Like, no, it's not. So you have this ability in this more digital world to capture that consumer information, build that community, and then fulfill for that community if you get on the proper, the proper platforms. And I mean, we wouldn't be so pro this and not invest in it. We've definitely invested in platforms that are trying to be the Shopify for alcohol. And we'll see Amazon snap them up. Amazon might try and fight them. Everyone would pay $1 billion for Drizzly. But I think the important thing to remember is, like, it's not just tools for big brands. Shopify is unique because it's digital tools for all. And, again, it's probably more important for small brands to be digital first than it is for the big brands. People are going to get their T's no matter what. But whether or not you're marketing correctly as a small brand could be digital first.
One of the things that I really love about that too, if you don't mind, Shawn, just like
go for it.
On top of that is in the three-tiered system as it exists today, it's very difficult for smaller brands to get the support from the distributor tier, to get the placements that they want, to get to the consumers. And so what ends up happening is oftentimes it's not the best product wins. It's not the best brand wins. It's the best brand that can support itself with a lot of funding. And I think that as things move more and more digital and that becomes a little more seamless, the entire process, you're going to start to see smaller brands with unique points of view really gain traction in a way that they haven't in the past. And that's super exciting. Like, we're really pumped to see some of these brands that otherwise wouldn't have gotten the attention because maybe they're a price point that Southern says, well, no, we already got a vodka at that price point. We're never going to carry you. Now all of a sudden they have a way to reach all the same consumers, and they can do it, through the 6 inches in their hand. Like, that's pretty amazing.
So I got 2 points now. Now I'm trying to figure out which one to throw it back at you to start with. Do you think that this is the like you said, the best opportunity for smaller brands to really? Because I think sometimes small brands are always in the back of the head waiting for the big guys to pick them up. Like you said, like, oh no, I don't need e-commerce. I don't even need a taste room because eventually Southern will pick me up or something like that, or a liquor store will pick me up and it'll blow up through there. Do you think now that small brands need to be more creative than ever to really get it out? Because I've had a few people I've chatted to and they're like, well, I'm not getting the same sort of analytics on my social media and that sort of thing. I'm like, yeah, but there's tons of stuff out there. Everybody's making something.
Yeah.
Do you think small brands need to start thinking more like big brands in the way of online, obviously, social media, influencer marketing, this sort of things, and start thinking like a big brand more now while they have the opportunity than to wait for someone else to come along and be their knight in shining armor?
Yeah, I mean, I'd take it a step further and say that this is their chance to sprint out ahead of the big brands, because like the internet and digital is a democratizing force. All it does is reduce friction. That's all it does. It makes it easier to talk, drive community, and it makes it easier to get something from someone who makes it to someone who wants it. The more and more that the Southern Wine and Spirits and the RNDCs are the arbiters in that business, is the more and more you have to sit there and wait and hope someone does it for you. So as soon as the friction is taken away, all of the really good entrepreneurs are going to be like, wait a second, I have all these tools that are identical to the tools that Tito's has. They don't have better tools than me. They don't have, they're like, doesn't matter if Southern Wine and Spirits backs Tito's more. The internet doesn't back anybody more. It gives you the opportunity to tell your brand story, make your value proposition, and try and grow that way. And that's why every time that an industry becomes more digital, it becomes more long tail and actually captures more value in aggregate. Yeah, there'll still be acquisitions for people who hit on really interesting cultural zeitgeist, but what really excites me is for all the small guys that never had this tool before. And it's, to your point, Shopify isn't that expensive, and you can have the exact same tool that the largest brands in the world use.
So I want to actually circle back to the Uber acquisition of Drizzly, because Drizzly's only a couple of years old. For a lot of people in my sector, in my industry, they're still getting used to using it. Like, a lot of people are still figuring out how to order from it, how to access it, that sort of thing. Do you think that the valuation? What's your opinion on the evaluation and the purchase of Drizzly via Uber? Because Drizzly's only 2 to 3 years old.
It's a little older than that.
A little bit older than that.
My opinion is that they got it for steal.
Wow.
Absolute steal. I mean, the gross marketplace value that was going through Drizzly was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And that doesn't mean that's all revenue coming to Drizzly, but again, like did people thought Shopify was expensive at IPO. People thought Amazon was expensive at IPO. Like when you get these generational changes in the way that people transact commerce, it's the valuation is it's always good to acquire these things. And like the cool thing about beverage alcohol, and this is why we focus so much of our VC dollars on this. Like it's not even rocket science to just believe that one more piece of e-commerce that just happens to be 20 years behind the rest of e-commerce is going to move more that way. Like all you have to do is say, like, wait, do I think that people like buying things from their iPhone, paying a small delivery charge, and having them arrive at their house 30 minutes later? Like, yeah, like that's a lot better than going to your corner liquor store. So and when you factor in how many drivers Uber has and how big their Uber Eats aspect is, like, I think it was just an absolute slam dunk, and that's the reason why both DoorDash and GoPuff, by the way, were bidding on it. It wasn't just Uber. Yeah.
So let's get into Goat Rodeo, because firstly, I'd love to know the story behind the name. And secondly, I looked over your portfolio. You've got some very interesting brands. Like you really hone in on definitely trends that are coming or are here now or were coming. Like it's crazy that a year ago, Drinksmith would have been like, oh, that's a brand it's gonna blow up really quick, and then 3 months later, COVID hits, and all of a sudden, obviously, everybody wants to make cocktails at home. But you got some fantastic CSR brands as well, like One Hope and that sort of thing. So I'm curious. Firstly, I got to know the name for the Goat Rodeo, because like you could have called it your two last names, Capital, or something kind of like something dignified. But let's call it Goat Rodeo.
Hey, well, we're very dignified. Yeah. Come on. Look at us. Come on. Go ahead.
All right. So, like, at the end of the day, like when it's all said and done, we're brand guys. We understand the power of a brand. And we had a number of names in the hopper, and we were going back and forth. And we do a lot of brand work, and we always have a bunch of brands. Every once in a while we hit on something. We both look at each other and say, okay, like that's interesting. And what works here with Goat Rodeo Capital is any early stage startup is successful because they do one thing really well. They do one thing better than everybody else. And that one thing is hopefully scalable. And everything else is just a goat rodeo. So when you look behind the scenes, there's not that much sophistication at the end of the day. These are all like early stage, like you're trying to figure it out as you go. So our commitment as Goat Rodeo Capital is to come in, help fund that one thing that you can do better than everyone else, help you scale that one thing, and then help herd the goats, and clean up the back end.
A duck on water. On the top of the water, it's nice and clear, and then underneath is
leg
kicking along.
How terrible a goat in the water looks. And that's sometimes what these companies. To answer your other question about the portfolio, the other thing I will say about Goat Rodeo is, like, we don't take ourselves too seriously. We're in an industry that occasionally does take itself way too seriously. So in a name that kind of takes the piss out of finance and alcohol, and says, hey, our sense of humor got us here. Our sense of humor is going to keep going, and also no one forgets the name after they hear it. But as far as your question on the portfolio, like when we started this, the reason the portfolio feels kind of unique is that we will very rarely invest in something that we call like brand only. We look for brand plus. Like, of course, the brand has to feel right, be positioned well. I think it has a chance to grow from a psychographic standpoint. But we have a really heavy bent on how do you go to market? Is there a digital aspect? Do you have a piece of true IP that can scale faster? Because there just hasn't been very much innovation in the way brands go to market in like 30 years. They try to get into the on-premise as a trial and awareness vehicle, and then they try and get big case drops in Bevmo and Total Wine. And if everybody's trying to do it the exact same way, those ways will be really expensive. That's just kind of laws of economics. So we tend to look at things that can scale, whether it be digitally or as a function of CSR, especially if you can be convinced that the company really believes in that, that are empowering different kinds of sales models that aren't just sell to a distributor that then sells to a retailer. So even though the portfolio seems disparate, it's actually governed by some kind of core tenets on like, this is what we think BevAlc is going to look like 10 years from now. And COVID definitely helped accelerate a lot of that.
So you've got Drinksmith, and we were talking off camera before. Is like I talk about it a lot, about cocktail bartenders in particular, thinking that our niche is so small, and they always think that it's because of social media, we get into social media bubble, and then the algorithm just pumps stuff like liquor.com and Punch and all those sort of things down your throat via the algorithm. So you think that you're changing the world, that you are this cocktail brain surgeon. But I always say, like I helped a very high end liquor store open a number of years ago, and they've got a huge amount of Amaros and vermouths and just crazy stuff. Like I go there and I just pick up random stuff for my bar, but if I ever want a humbling experience, I just go and watch what people buy, and they're still picking up Mickey's of vodka, and where we have Lucky, which is your sort of Budweiser, our island, like 16-pack cans of Lucky, and you're like, nothing I've done means anything. And in Victoria, we have a great cocktail scene. Like we really have great people. We have a really good saturation point of clientele. So for Drinksmith, that sort of thing, obviously you see the change, and you were making a comment about a woodworker. And yeah. I really want to get this on tape because I think it's a genius analogy for this. Yeah. But you were chatting about a woodworker investing in Home Depot.
Yeah, well, so what I was saying was like imagine like woodworking, like people who are really into it and they're hobbyists and they're obsessed with it. It's great that they have places to go and talk about that in communities. But if your only other option is IKEA, everybody who's a really high-end woodworker is just going to think that their niche is the greatest thing in the world until restoration hardware comes. And a lot of what we're trying to do is say, hey, mixology is amazing. These top 100 bars in the world are amazing, and the mixologists behind them are amazing. But people in the suburbs of St. Louis have never had a chance to have that, 6-ingredient, perfectly balanced cocktail. And what makes Drinksmith so unique, and why we've invested so heavily and are so supportive there, is when I pull that demographic data for Drinksmith, and look who is doing the buying, because in this digital world we can figure that out. It is almost perfectly balanced from deep urban to kind of middle urban to suburban to rural, and that is not normally how a brand explodes. Like if I were to show you that same graph for like Monkey 47, it would be 99% deep urban. All right, and it can take 10, 15 years for that to slowly move its way out. But like Drinksmith is doing this job of saying like, well, what if one of the best cocktails in the world was available to your home, is available anywhere you want it to ship to? And they'll ship to you overnight, and they'll do a really great job of using very fresh ingredients, and very considered recipes. And going right back to that notion of reducing friction, I want Bad Birdie to be able to make a cocktail for the world and not just whatever bar she happens to work at. And I want her to have a percentage of every one of those cocktails that sells. Like that's what I mean by reducing friction. We want to celebrate mixology and unconstrain it, not compete with it.
So I'm curious, and I want to bring this back to your days at Gallo. Obviously, Gallo is a big business. Business is a big focus. Obviously, a lot of passion goes into it as well. With small brands and stuff, you were talking about traditional ways of bringing stuff to market, which I think the hospitality industry is always ingrained in. Oh, this is the way we've always done it. This is how we've always done it. This is what we do, instead of looking at different ways. How do you? And I talk about this quite a bit. How do you balance off when you come to these small producers and these small companies, the passion versus business element? Because a lot of the time these companies go into business purely passion. They have a great product, they want to share that product, but the business mechanics behind keeping that momentum going is quite difficult. And I find when I talk to a lot of restaurateurs and owners who have investors behind them, balancing out that business versus passion is such a hard dichotomy to sort of like balance.
Yep.
When you guys start changing these small brands, how do you balance that off?
That's a really good question. And I think that if you look at like the path to success for a lot of brands, it is littered with the corpses of good liquor, good juice, good branding, but didn't have the business acumen behind it. And I think that it's a really unique thing to find. It's really kind of the unicorns in the space who are able to have that passion, but also understand that you need to have a good like financial underpinnings to the business that you're running, to understand what you're doing and how you're getting there. And I think it even goes back to a point that you made earlier, Shawn, that a lot of people, a lot of these smaller independent operators are out there waiting for their knight in shining armor to come scoop them up. And I think that too often we see that people are building something without trying to also build a good organization. If you build a good organization, the likelihood that you're going to get attention from potential acquirers is so much higher. And good juice, good brand is great. Good execution and good financial management is critical. And I think it's often overlooked. So one of the things that we try and look for are we need to see the passion. If the passion's not there, then we're not going to back you. Mm-hmm. And then we want to see either a cursory understanding of, hey, this is our understanding of the space. A lot of the times, we're looking at people who are first-time operators in a pretty convoluted system. We want to see that they have an understanding that, hey, this is complex and I'm going to need some help along the way, and are open to input and advice around how to build that. Whether it's finding the back-end services that help there, it's partnering with maybe a independent sales organization, something like that. So it's definitely the passion needs to be there, but then it's either some understanding, willingness to learn, and proven record that they can learn quickly, and the additional ability to say, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm looking for help. And if that's your response to a question as an entrepreneur, somebody asks you a question like, hey, talk me through your margin structure when X, Y, and Z happens. And they say, look, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm open to advice and I'm open to help. That right there is a pretty good starting place for us as investors.
Have you had some uncomfortable conversations post sort of rolling and said, hey, we love what you're doing, but you still got to tighten this up?
Yeah. Yes. Short answer, yes.
This is another one when it comes to passion versus business. A lot of people get into the game not actually ever thinking about a exit strategy or, like as you were saying, long tail acquisition, whether it be from a big brand or people like yourselves who sort of build out the brand. How do you sort of talk? Because like I know for me personally, I never think about getting into a business opportunity thinking like, how am I going to exit this down the road? How do you sort of prep? Because it is a lot of prep. It is a certain amount of education and prep and sort of making them understand, like, and they can still stay as figureheads and so on and so forth. But when you do start getting into the VCs and big style investments in your business, people never think about exit strategies on like, how do I eventually get out of this? Because it's a passion project. They just love it because they love it. How do you sort of prep people for this sort of long-term sort of possibility of exit strategy?
Yeah. I mean, I'll build a little bit on what James just said. Passion is really important. And being open to advice is really important, but like passion without vision is just a project, and usually a project that's not going to go very far. And when I say vision, it's more of a, here's the world how it is now. Here's the world as I see it, and I will do anything to make the world be the way that I want it to be. And so that also kind of dictates both our investment and the exit standpoint and how those horizons work. So I'll use Drinksmith again as an example. I mean, they have a vision of being the world's bar. If they continue to execute against that, exit's not gonna be their problem. It's gonna be who do I choose to exit to and for how much. And so that like that to me is, I think you asked at the very beginning, like you're like, oh, I haven't seen much VC, in the hospitality and bev space. We tend to really get excited when people have a really big vision. And I want to make a successful whiskey brand that isn't a big vision. It's a wonderful passion project, and some of them will get acquired. But the first person who said, I want to make a really successful whiskey brand that's not in Kentucky, and I'm going to build High West, that's a vision. And it did get acquired. And so, that to me is, again, it's parsing passion versus vision. And if they have vision, exit takes care of itself.
So that actually leads me into the next question. Like, looking through your portfolio, you haven't got any traditional hard liquor brands in the portfolio quite yet. Is there a reason why you're sort of focusing on your sourced cocktails, your drink smiths, your One Hopes and stuff like that over the traditional style, like hard liquor brands?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is that doesn't mean we won't invest in one someday.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. But we really do tend to favor those things that can scale quicker than average. Because again, if we take a step back and analyze the system, if everybody's going to the market in the same way, COVID or otherwise, which is I start regionally, I try and get in some bars so people try me and know me, and then I hope Southern Wine and Spirits or someone like that picks me up and I go national. If 99% of people are on one side of the teeter-totter, sprint as fast as you can to the other side of the teeter-totter. And so we were like, hey, let's go to do the things that have interesting intellectual property, have interesting digital go-to-markets, and we'll do it that way. And then COVID hit and made us, look brighter faster. And so when everybody is over on the other side of the teeter-totter in digital, and all of a sudden people aren't, fighting over cocktail placements and menu placements, and case drops and Bevmo, you'll see us sprint right back to the other side of the teeter-totter. So we just go where the crowd isn't, and within that have a couple of really closely held beliefs of like, hey, e-commerce is here to stay and it's only going to get bigger. D2C is a really unique way to build community and brand, et cetera, et cetera. So we might invest in the right hard spirit, but it needs to have a really unique vision. And in the meantime, we're in something called Speakeasy, which allows any craft brand to do just what we've been talking about, essentially become the Shopify for them. So I'd rather invest in the whole idea of craft digitizing than any one craft brand trying to digitize.
Yeah, and talking about I'm not even going to get into social media with you guys when it comes to craft brands and trying to figure out that they need to have video and fancy photos and all this stuff. I always do find it funny, like people were always raving when Ryan Reynolds bought up Aviation, and they're like, oh, this new breakout craft brand. I'm like, it's a decade old. Maybe older. It was like, it was so old when he bought it.
This was in Texas only for like 15 years.
It was insane. I remember I still have a bottle of the original packaging, which was just a wine bottle with a label slapped on it. And I knew Ryan Majarian really well when he first started Aviation. So let's tie this off because I don't want to keep you guys too late today. How did COVID change the way you guys were sort of envisaging the world going forward, pros and cons? Because I think a lot of people, like especially in the hospitality industry, it's really difficult to look for positives during the pandemic and stuff like that. But I understand that a lot of brands really exploded during COVID. Like a lot of smaller brands really stepped up their game during COVID. I've been following a lot of the stuff from Blue Coat Gin in Philadelphia and stuff like that. The way that they've been marketing, and they hired a what do they call them? A digital brand ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a brand ambassador, but his job is just to go in and make digital EDM every single day, and they put it up on TikTok and Instagram and all that sort of stuff. How did COVID affect your guys' thought processes and goals for 2020, 2021?
Go ahead, James.
I think first of all, like it was a little bit of vindication. I mean, like we anticipated that things were going to move in a digital nature. As CJ has talked about, like it was really just an accelerant for that. So a lot of what we fundraised on for our first fund was, hey, we believe this is going to happen. We don't know if it's going to be in 10 years. We don't know if it's going to be in 5 years. but it's going to start happening. COVID certainly accelerated that. So a lot of what we were expecting to see has been accelerated. In addition to that, it started to open up some different things that I don't know a year ago or a year and a half ago, I'll say, were even on our radar. So, some of it being like, okay, retailers who are shifting their focus away from building bricks and mortar operations into being, solely existing in order to fulfill digital orders. Like that's interesting. That's not a space that we saw coming. I mean, GoPuff is maybe the closest example, but GoPuff offers an entire grocery experience. So we're starting to see liquor stores kind of move into that space too. In addition to that, I mean, the tough thing is like we've seen a lot of our friends suffer. Bar owners, bartenders. It's been a hard year for them, and I'm very optimistic and fingers crossed that we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm willing to bet that we're entering into what I'll call the Roaring 20s, the second edition of the Roaring 20s. It's going to feel a lot like the Roaring 20s in the 1900s because post-pandemic, people are itching to get back out and to socialize again. So how is that going to look in a new space where you don't see the same number of venues, whether they be bars or music venues, et cetera, like they've been consolidated, they've gotten smaller. Like, how are they going to keep up with, what I expect to be a larger demand? Is there going to be new types of restaurants and bar concepts evolving to kind of service this new client with an eye towards digital and building that digital community, reach them digitally and then bring them in physically? So I think that's some of the things that I've started looking at recently, but love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned something, digital ambassadors. Shawn, like, shout out to our friend Kyle over at Samson Surrey, ex-head of the USBG. Like, a lot of these really forward-thinking spirits brands that were really on-premise heavy, they didn't just like fire everybody and quit. Like we were just on the phone a couple of days ago with Ilegal Mezcal. They didn't fire any of their salespeople. They said, hey, you guys are all going to have to relearn how to sell in a digital world. And this notion of digital ambassador, and like, I hope that doesn't go away. Because like going back to our prior comment, like if everybody's going to the market the same way, trying to send their ambassadors in to try and grab that half an hour of the bar manager's time on a Tuesday afternoon, all that does is let the bigger brands outspend you, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's all that it does. If everybody's the same thing, it just makes it more expensive, and the people with the most money wins. All right. If you want a situation where there are a lot of different ways to try and create community, try and create customer awareness and trial, a crisis can tend to have a really interesting, almost like Cambrian explosion effect, where everybody has to try and figure out something new on the fly. And a lot of those tools, like digital whiskey tastings, like I would way rather have that as a brand owner and have legitimate connection with my truly knowledgeable ambassador with 20 folks than try and be on yet one more menu. So I love the fact that the money's moving there, and I absolutely hope it stays. Like I hope a lot of these brands look up their budgets and don't just immediately go back to the old way of like pay whatever it takes to get on the menu.
Such an interesting point.
Yeah.
Like you think about how much time ambassadors spend on planes and going to different country clubs to pour for 15 or 20 people. Now you can reach an audience of hundreds, if not thousands, and you don't have to leave your studio. Like, how nice is that? That's exciting.
So I hope that like never waste a good crisis, right?
And I agree. I definitely agree. I think I was talking to Ian Burrell a few months ago, and he was saying like with his big rum festival that he does in Miami and around the world, and I'm like, well, you're going to send all the rum tastings to people, so you get 10 bottles of rum, you split them up into 2-ounce pours, you ship them everywhere. I was like, I would say 30 to 40% of those people would never buy a plane ticket to actually go to the rum festival themselves. And now all of a sudden, like you said, like that rural St. Louis, like, or like mid-urban, like they may never actually go to New York for the BCB and stuff like that, but they have an opportunity to have a cocktail packaged and sent to them. I'm hoping a bit of a hybrid because I still like my traveling. I still want to be on planes. I still want to go speak. Yeah. I don't want to keep doing Zoom seminars for something in Berlin or the Ukraine. I just want to go to Berlin. Let me go to Berlin.
Yeah.
So for you, gents, your outlook, let's blue sky it for 2021, 2022. What's your game plan for the next 18 months? Obviously, you're 18 months and a bit old, or almost 2 years old now.
Yeah.
For Goat Rodeo, what's the blue sky outlook for you guys for the next 18 months, 2 years?
So we've deployed a lot of our capital out of Fund One. Luckily, we've got some really supportive LPs or investors who have asked us to put together Fund Two. So that should be up and running here as quickly as possible. And the idea is to really keep doing more of the same. Keep investing in brands that have 1 foot in digital nativity, 1 foot in a really good understanding of the 3-tiered system, and a magical 3rd foot in this world that understands that the 3-tiered system is going to continue to change, and that, like, I mean, I have to get this in every podcast. Like, there's just no way that owning trucks in 2021 is the basis of a really profitable business. All right, like. That just can't be it. That can't be it. We have this whole world conspiring to get things from people who want them, or people who make them to people who want them, and the value should accrue in that manner, not to multiple tiers that sometimes are just taking a little bit off the top of what's going on in that system. So I think we'll continually to really explore this e-com thesis, but making sure that e-com thesis has a soul. Like, One Hope has an absolute soul, and then a really big tech engine that makes it work. And when you put those two things together, when you grab amazing mixologists, amazing venues, and help them understand that there's a frictionless digital world coming, the best idea is powered by good tech is always going to win.
Have you got a final thought on that one, James?
I like CJ's answer. I'll take his answer.
If you guys were in school together, you've just been copying each other's tests.
That's good. Closer than you might think.
Well, guys, I really want to thank you for your time. This was super insightful, and it's difficult sometimes being in Victoria, in BC, and talking to these small distilleries that really are a mom and pop shop, and trying to explain to them to look at a big company sort of mentality and sort of mantra and stuff, especially when it comes to e-commerce and just website page speeds and crazy, just simple things. And you just want to sort of shove it down people's throats, and it's difficult sometimes because I'm a bull in a china shop most of the time. But I really want to thank you for this insight, because I think that I think that, again, like I said in the very beginning, like VCs and hospitality is such a rare combination, a rare partnership. So I appreciate everything that you do, and again, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, appreciate you having us on.
Yeah, great talking, Shawn.
Thanks, guys. I'll see you really soon.